to turn things over to you.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second in a series of webinars hosted by the New York State PTA Mental Health Task Force called Conversations on Mental Health. Just a little bit of background before we start. Recently, the New York State PTA sent its members a survey. Let's talk about youth mental health, asking parents, caregivers, families, educators, and others concerned about children to complete the survey to help us address youth mental health needs and concerns. This series has been designed to talk about some of those concerns. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started and we begin this conversation. I just want to state that this webinar series in no way is a substitute for professional help. The purpose of this webinar is to open up a dialogue with parents, teachers, caregivers, and students on mental health issues facing us all, how we can identify those concerns and ask for help. Joining us this evening is Helen Hoffman, the president of New York State PTA, Kyle Belakopitsky, our executive director of New York State PTA, and the members of the Mental Health Task Force. Amani DeGame, our first VP, Susan Fisher, our resolutions coordinator, Lori Fontana, our field service coordinator, Amy Heisek, our wellness coordinator, Mary McNamara, region director, Westchester East Putnam, Lynn Petrovsky, field service coordinator, Beth Sniffen, our outreach coordinator, Shauna Wald, region director, Central Hudson, Megan Zarki, our education coordinator, and Lissa Zukla, our family engagement coordinator. Our moderators for this evening are going to be members of our mental health task force, Mary McNamara and Lori Fontana, and our panelists, which we'll introduce to you shortly. At this time, I'd like to invite our president, Helen Hoffman, to welcome everyone to start our conversation off tonight. Helen?
Thank you, Pat. I'm so happy you could join us this evening. I want to start by thanking everyone, one of you, for all you do supporting kids, raising awareness. As Pat mentioned, this is the second in the series of Let's Talk About Mental Health webinars. Most of you know that my platform as the New York State PTA president focuses on our children's mental health, especially after the last couple of years. Tonight's conversation on social media addresses so many areas of mental health issues, such as body image, bullying, suicidal ideations, and much more. So let's get this conversation started. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you, Helen. Now let's jump in as we engage in conversations on mental health. Let's talk social media. Mary and Lori, I turn it over to you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lori Fontana. Social media refers to the online communication designed to create networks for individuals and communities to share ideas, messages, pictures, thoughts, information, and exchange content with other people. It's a great tool to stay connected to people in our lives. Since the first social media site in 1997, media platforms have grown significantly in the last 10 years, largely due to smartphones. This year, there are more than 5 billion users of social media worldwide. Some of the most popular platform apps that we are familiar with are Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, Discord, WhatsApp, YouTube, Messenger, TikTok, just to name a few. The reality is we know that social media is here to stay, and we will need to evolve with it. The questions tonight we're going to try to discuss are going to circle around how do we use social media in a healthy and safe way? and how can we support our children? So tonight we invite our two guests, Dr. Kara Alamo and Dr. Jason Teague, to discuss mental health and social media. At this time, I'll ask Dr. Kara to tell us a little bit about herself.
Hi, I'm Kara Alimo. I am a professor of communication at Fairleigh Dickinson University, where I created our university's academic programs in social media. And I have been writing for CNN Opinion about the social impact of social media and also issues affecting women and girls since 2016. I'm also the author of this book, Over the Influence: Why Social Media is Toxic for Women and Girls and How We Can Take It Back, which was just published in March. And I have been speaking to parents and students at schools and other events all across the country about how we can get kids' use of social media right. So of course, you can all find me on social media.
Thank you, Dr. Alimo. Dr. Teague? You're muted.
Hi, how are you? My name is Jason Teague. I am a school psychologist in the Sewanaka Central School District. Graduated from Hofstra University, and I've been practicing in mental health for about 20 years now. Really, my interest and expertise has been because of the students that I work with. I work within alternative school program within the Sewanaka Central School District, the Prestige Academy. And, you know, I deal with a lot of at-risk adolescents, and I've really been able to see firsthand how social media has changed the way that our kids are thinking and the way that they're developing. And I'm also very interested as the parent of two young boys who are growing up in this digital age and trying to help them navigate it as safely and as healthily as possible.
Thank you, Dr. Teague. I'm going to turn it over to Mary for our first question.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to start with you, Dr. Alimo, and we'll alternate each question so that we kind of go back and forth. So the first question we have is, how do we start a conversation with our children on their use and experiences with social media?
It's a great question. I think that some of these conversations have to start long before our kids are on social media, knowing what they're going to be up against. In my book, I look particularly at the effects of social media on girls. And one of the things we know is that girls spend a lot more time on these visually oriented platforms like Instagram, where it is very easy to start to feel like their bodies and their lives don't measure up to those of other people. One of the stories I tell in the first chapter of my book is of a woman who asked me to call her Vivian, who wrote to me after reading one of my CNN Opinion columns and said to me, I got my eating disorder on Instagram as a teenager. And she was 15 years old when Instagram launched. She was an early adopter. She was really into yoga. So she posted a picture of herself doing a handstand. And that picture was picked up by a so-called Fitspo or fitness inspiration page, which sucked her down a rabbit hole of this toxic content. And so I think, you know, the possibility for girls to have similar experiences is real. And that's why from a very early age, we have to be talking to our daughters and kids of all genders about why we don't judge people for their appearances. And Kate Manne, who I think is one of the most important feminists alive, she's a philosopher at Cornell University, published her book Unshrinking in January. And there's a passage in this book in which she talks about sitting down with her very young daughter, taking out Instagram, showing her daughter pictures of people's bodies, people of all different sizes and races and levels of ability. And what she would say to her daughter is, I'm so glad these people are here in the world with us. And I thought that was such a beautiful way of starting to teach children from an early age about how you view other human beings. And then there's all the other values we need to instill, like kindness and tolerance for differences, so that they can display those values when they do join social networks. Once kids start using social platforms, I'll just mention a few of the things we have to talk to them about. One is obviously all of the dangers that they can experience online. So things like sextortionists. So these are professionals who will start following or friending a child, establish an emotional relationship with them, convince them to share one racy image. And then the next text that comes through is Venmo me $25,000 in the next hour, or I'm putting this image all over social media. So one of the big things we have to teach our kids is why you should never sext. And it's really interesting. I interviewed a lot of girls for my book, girls who I was put in touch with by their mothers, who explained to me that sexting is just normal for this generation. I think it's kind of hard for those of us who are older and didn't grow up in this culture to fully wrap our heads around this. But it's really common practice. One girl explained to me that you take intimate images in advance of being asked for them, and you store them on For Your Eyes Only, For My Eyes Only on Snapchat, so that when you're asked for them, you have them at the ready and you don't have to go through the work of, taking time to create them then. And so it's really scary. And as we all know, kids could, in theory, be prosecuted for producing pornography of themselves. So that's a huge conversation that we need to have with our kids. But that, sort of the number one takeaway, if parents learn just one thing, I think it's that your kids need to know that they can go to you when they get into trouble. I interviewed an attorney who handles cases of cyber exploitation, and she told me the most dangerous situation you can be in, of course, is now your child is being sextorted, but they feel like they can't come to you because they're afraid that you're going to take their phone away. And so unfortunately, one of my pieces of advice to parents is never threaten to take the phone away.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Teague, would you like to follow up?
Yeah. So I guess it's the question, just going back to, how do we need to help our kids as they go through this? I mean, I think talking about this, kind of like Kara said, the younger the better. Get them talking about it at a young age. I have a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old, and we've been talking about the dangers of social media, for some time. I think normalize parental controls at an early age. My kids don't have their own, phone, or really they don't have their own tablet or anything like that yet. We use the Nintendo Switch. They like Mario, they like Zelda, those kind of things, and that's something that I'm comfortable with in my house. But they're used to. There's a timer on the Switch. They get an hour and a half a day. When the timer runs out, that's it. Well, or maybe it isn't. They can ask. It can be a conversation. I can give them more time if I choose to, if I feel like, they've been doing other things. But I think getting them used to those parental controls at an early age, what I find is that by the time they get to me at the high school level, they've already kind of been handed this unfettered access to all of the information in the world, which, whether we like it or not, includes pornography. It includes, all of the things that Kara was discussing. It includes child predators that are probably more frequent online than they're going to be in your neighborhood. Normalize those parental controls, get them used to it. My hope is that my kids, as they get older, we were just having dinner and they wanted to turn on the TV during the dinner. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Most of the time we don't. Tonight, maybe because I knew I was coming on here and I didn't want to be a complete hypocrite, was definitely a night that we did not. And it wasn't a big battle though, because they are used to it. I've established that as a norm. I've established this as an area that, this is an area where they do need protection. And there's a lot of different apps that you can use to do it on your phone, whether it be Screen Time on Apple, Digital Wellbeing on Android, Bark 360, or some of the, third-party providers that you can get in there. I think another thing is to recognize and talk with your kids about all forms of social media. Most people don't think of YouTube as social media, but YouTube is 100% social media. And I explain that to my kids. Another one, online video games. I would consider that social media. They're out there, they're socializing with other people through this digital media format. Twitch, all of these other things. I mean, be aware there's other apps out there. You might, as you have older kids, they might download something called Yubo, and you're like, oh, what's Yubo? It doesn't seem that bad. Yubo is primarily a teen dating site. And I don't know that that's necessarily something that we need to be exposing our teenagers to, for a lot of the reasons that Kara just mentioned. And there's other ones. So I think encouraging balance. I mean, I know when I've looked American Academy of Pediatrics encourage, promote physical activity at least 1 hour per day. Get adequate sleep. It's one of the big red flags that your child might be having too much social media when it starts to influence their sleep, and they're sleeping with it next to their bed and they can't get it out of their hands. Avoid devices an hour before bed. Try to establish a reading habit or any other kind of habit other than social media, right? Or screens really before bed. And designating media free times, promoting healthy activities. And I think the biggest thing that we can do as parents, educators, and adults around these kids is show our own proper use of social media. I set on my phone limits for for Instagram, and I have limits for I like X or Twitter. I should just call it Twitter. But I set limits on it because I know that it'll put me in a bad mood if I start scrolling on Twitter for too long and I start looking at it for too long, and that kind of content, it starts to put me in a bad mood. And what kind of model am I being for my kid if I'm on there 7 hours a day, but I'm telling them not to? Then I'm not really doing a great job of modeling appropriate behavior. So I think that's kind of a good start for how we can kind of get it going.
Thank you. So I get the second question to follow up to, and I'll start with you this time, Dr. Teague. Social media can have a significant impact on mental health. Can you discuss some of the positive effects social media may have on our children's mental health?
Yeah, I was kind of dreading this question because unfortunately I'm seeing fewer and fewer as we progress. I mean, it's definitely, I think, most safe and I think most positive for older teens and adults, especially when you're talking about specifically social media. I know I've been reading some of Jonathan Haidt's work, and he's really encouraging 16 and plus for social media accounts. The online right now, you have to be 13 or plus, and I would say that's a bare minimum before they should be exposed to it. But the positives, it can encourage creativity. We've done some activities at my school where we kind of get the kids doing something and it's kind of fun and they're together and they're doing a little dance on TikTok or something like that, and we can post it and share. So it can bring people together in that way. It can be a source of positive information. I know some kids and adults, they'll go on there and they can find some feeds, although I will urge caution, especially when it comes to mental health, looking for advice on the internet. But yes, there can be some positive information. They've done some studies at universities where kids can really learn interactively using social media. But I just think, yeah, we just got to be cautious about getting too, and I don't want to be too negative. I know this is supposed to be the positive part, but I think we have to be very, very cautious because I think, unfortunately, in my personal and professional opinion, the risks definitely outweigh the benefits at this time.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Alimo?
I completely agree with you that the risks are terrifying and profound. I do think from interviewing girls for my book that we need to acknowledge the voices of girls who say that, and kids of all genders who say that they were minorities in their physical communities and they went online and they found their people, or they developed interests that turned into careers, or they got involved in important causes. I'm with Dr. Haidt on the age of 16, and we should chat more about that later. But for now, to answer the question, I think that I believe that social networks could be designed to not have the negative impacts that they're having right now. And just last week, I met Jen Libby, the founder of a new app for kids called Promly. And from what I gather from Jen, this new app doesn't allow adults to use it. It age gates, so you don't have, hopefully, adult predators connecting with these kids online, doesn't collect data, and is designed to connect kids to mental health resources and to opportunities like internships and congressional youth advocacy, and match them based on their interests. I haven't used it. I'm an adult. I'm not allowed to. But when I hear things like that, I think, that's the app I would want my kids on when they're teenagers. And so I hold open the possibility that in particular nonprofit social networks could crop up to not be designed to be addictive to kids, to not send kids down rabbit holes of toxic content, but instead to have a positive influence on their lives. And I'm crossing all my fingers, all my extremities, that Promly will be the app to do it.
Okay, thank you so much. Lori, you're up. And you're muted. You're still muted.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
We just wanted to hear more of you, Mary. So now that we've heard that you've pointed out positive influences that social media can have on our children's mental health, could we discuss some of the less desirable effects social media has? For example, panic disorder, loneliness, peer pressure, addiction, bullying. We're going to start with Dr. Teague.
Great. I'm just going to read a quick quote that I saw when I thought of when I saw this question. You know, the rising caseloads at high school and university counseling centers may be caused by greater numbers of iGen adolescents experiencing mental health issues, perhaps due to the profound shift in how adolescents spend their leisure time. And I think it's 100% true, and it's definitely what I see on a daily basis. Kids are going through this very sensitive developmental phase, and they're going through it online. And what it's causing is a lot of what you said there. I mean, when I talk to kids, and I'm just going to kind of go from my experience now for a little bit. When I talk to kids, it's very, very interesting the way that you see that the way that they overthink. So you talk about anxiety and thinking about what others are going to be thinking of you. When they're speaking to you in person, they're actually modeling the way that you would speak if you were typing in a text message, because they're finding their first social interactions are online, and they're aligning their norms with the online culture and then trying to bring that into the real world. And I think often what's happening is it's leading to that overthinking and anxious behaviors. A lot of the attentional issues that we're seeing. There's some kids think that how many kids do you talk to that will say, "Oh, I can listen to you and do this." It's like, yeah, it's fine. I'm doing this. I can multitask. I'm multitasking. They're not multitasking. What they're doing is dividing their attention between two different things. When scientists have studied multitasking, it's not something that the human brain does very well. What the brain is actually doing is they're juggling back and forth between two things at one time. And what they end up doing is neither thing very well at all. And we're having a hard time kind of finding that center and that focus. And I think that's a big part of what's leading to these increases in anxious behaviors and depression. Definitely a lot of the social comparisons, particularly with the girls, and the fitspiration and all of those things, they can be extremely toxic and potent. And I think, definitely the research bears out that girls are being far more impacted by the effect of social media, but it's happening to boys also. There's boys that are going on these fitspiration sites and seeing these, chiseled bodies and everything like that, and striving and pushing themselves in dangerous ways to kind of emulate those models that they're seeing online. So it's not, I don't think it's one size fit all. I think you're right when you say that it's like kind of all genders that are really being impacted by this. And I think what we're seeing is that we've under supervised kids online, and we've over supervised them in the real world, and this is what's kind of leading to this increase in anxious and depressive behaviors, and like kids just forming all these relationships. You don't know how many kids I have that their whole social group is people that are online, and then when they try to interact with people in the real world, they actually have a difficult time because they don't have that time. They don't know how to read facial expressions anymore, or they don't read facial expressions the same way, or they're thinking about the way that they would say things, and so overthinking it, the way that you might do a text message, that they have trouble communicating.
Thank you. Dr. Kara?
So some of the most rigorous research that I've seen on this subject comes out of the UK, and it found that during the ages at which kids are typically going through puberty, so 13 to 14-ish for girls, 14 to 15-ish for boys, greater use of social media is associated with lower life satisfaction a year later. But just to tick off, some of the potential dangers and harms, I think, leaving kids feeling less than, because we know that everyone is presenting the glamorized, filtered pictures of themselves and versions of their lives online. And so everyone goes onto social media and thinks that their life and their body isn't as good as everyone else's. Along with that, just the feelings of social exclusion. So it is very common among youth today to track the real-time locations of their friends on Snapchat. And so, I can't tell you how many people talk about, the feeling of seeing that many of your friends are together in the same place, but you're not there. Or a teenager the other day who asked her boyfriend to hang out. He said he wasn't available, and then she sees that he's with one of his friends instead. Along with that, feelings of loneliness. And so, Marisa Franco talks about this idea of a friendship famine in the United States, where it's now more common for people to feel disconnected than connected to other people. And I think what social networks do is they create these competitions among kids to have the most friends and the most followers, when, no kid needs 2,000 or 20,000 followers on Instagram, but every kid needs two friends they can talk to at the end of a really bad day, right? And so it's changing what friendship looks like for young people. I'm very concerned about body image issues and eating disorders. We know that the so-called Instagram body can usually only be achieved through surgery, but I don't think that's apparent at all, certainly to the girls who I interviewed for my book. The fact that when kids are spending time online, they're sleeping less, as Dr. Teague said, which is a huge problem and associated with so many different physical and psychological symptoms and impairments. I think that's also the stress of being essentially an influencer. So, it's arguably a full-time job for teenagers today to curate their feeds. And that's a huge responsibility on top of everything else that they need to be doing at this stage in life. As Dr. Teague said, I'm worried about just the inability to focus, right? So, the average kid today is getting over 200 notifications on their phone each day. As we know, as Dr. Teague said, the brain is not designed to multitask. And I see, among students, I've been a college professor for over a decade now. I do think the change is real in the ability to read a passage and understand it. You can take a look at how the reading passages on the SAT have changed over time, and that really tells you everything. And then, of course, the last big one is the way that social networks connect kids with predators. And predators have increasingly moved online. And as Dr. Teague said, so many kids aren't being supervised online, and it's absolutely terrifying.
Thank you. Mary?
Thank you. And just a reminder to all our attendees, if you have any other questions, please throw them in the chat and we will, at the end, get to them. So Dr. Alimo, I'll start with you for the next question. What signs should parents look out for when they are worried about their children becoming addicted to social media or developing problematic social media use? And when should parents look for professional help to support their children?
Dr. Teague would be the expert on this. I interviewed a psychotherapist and asked them this question for my book, and they said, when a teen is isolating more than usual, when they're moodier than usual, when their behaviors change in significant ways. The problem, of course, is that these can all be normal teen behaviors, right? But she said when many symptoms are present at once, it's time to seek some outside help.
Yeah, I concur. I think one of the big ones is interrupted sleep patterns. When you start to see that, adolescents really, as much as they might try to push it to less than 6 and 5 hours, I have kids that are, up all night and staying awake for multiple days at a time. 10 to 8 hours is really what's recommended for an adolescent to get in sleep. Their bodies are developing, their brains are developing. I mean, think about what it was like going through adolescence. As much as some of us will look back at it fondly, there was a lot of stress and difficulty at that time, and you're growing. So I would say, big one is definitely when you see that interrupted sleep pattern, their inability to detach from their phone. That like when you say, there's a consequence and you want to take away that phone, if they're not able to give that up, to me, that is starting to become a red flag, that there might be something else going on. And I kind of agree that in certain cases, you might not want to go there right away because you don't want to damage that bond, and you want to be able to keep an open line of communication, which is definitely a huge protective factor. But I think when you start to see that there's really, it becomes more than it becomes obsessive. When you start to notice signs of it becoming obsessive, that's when I would say that you're really looking at a problem that you might need to get some professional help on. When it starts to exclude other activities, like you said, when you start to student who was previously engaged in a lot of socialization outside in the real world, that starts to withdraw away and starts to isolate, when they stop, when it starts to take over time from academics, from sports, from other kind of creative endeavors, and you don't see them doing those kind of things anymore, and it just becomes kind of this exclusive on the phone time, I would say that that's another red flag. And really, I think like a sudden emergence of psychological distress that doesn't seem to fit a pattern, or seems kind of out of the. I have kids that'll come in and they start to present as if maybe they had some sort of trauma or something like that when in their life, where you kind of start to dig into the social history and you're not seeing as much of that. And what might actually be happening is that there is trauma happening. What's happening though is that it's occurring in the digital space. It's not occurring in the real world, so it's not something that maybe you can see overtly or outside with your eyes. It's going on the inside. It's going on inside the phone. So I think those are all things that you have to look out for. And I think monitoring, it kind of goes back to, and I don't want to be a broken record, but monitoring and establishing those kind of screen time rules from the beginning, so you can see. And at the end of the day, most kids are not buying their own phone. Most kids are getting their phone from their family. Set it up with parental controls. Watch how often they're on there. Monitor the amount of time. If they start fighting the limits, or you start seeing, the hours going up from 2 hours to 3 hours to, I've had kids show me their screen. I sit with most of my kids and I say, hey, pull out your phone. Let's look at the screen time. I've seen kids with 16 hours a day that they're on the phone, or they're connected, or upwards of that. And I think that's when you're definitely in the realm of, this is becoming a problem, and this is no longer typical behavior. This is problem behavior.
Thank you. The next question, we're going to start with you, Dr. Teague. How can parents help their children develop healthy boundaries to minimize the negative impact of social media while allowing them to establish positive interactions with their peers on social media?
Again, I hope I've got some of the younger families out there, but I think it all starts at a younger age. And when your kids are in the elementary age, that's when the conversation has to start. I think that's when the work has to start. I think encouraging and trying to allow your kids to be spend as much time and more time socializing the way we probably did before phones, socializing in more traditional means. I think that will inadvertently protect them from some of the risk of being online. I think a lot of it is moderation. Using the digital well-being apps, using the screen time apps, monitoring how much time is on there. Insofar as specific things, I don't know if this is necessarily, there's bullies in the real world, there's bullies online, there's bullies everywhere. Bullies are, and bullying is a part of life. I don't condone it. I don't think it's a good part of life. I think we should teach people to try to be as kind as they possibly can. That's what I try to teach my kids. That's what I try to teach my kids at work as well. But I think having them build up some resiliency, having them build up a little bit of, I can think of this one student that I worked with, and she was a huge Billie Eilish fan. I know she's graduated, but I know she's probably very excited. Billy's got a new album coming out in a couple of weeks. but she made a pretty simple post on something, and somebody started to go into the comments and said, wow, your jawline is messed up, or something to that effect, and like, commented on her physical features, as Dr. Alemo was saying. And she got very upset, and it ended up leading to a hospitalization. I think if she had had more in-person social opportunities and fewer online social opportunities, that might have protected her in that situation. I know, knowing her as a student, when she was around others and when she was in person and you had her live, face to face, one on one, she could utilize her coping skills. She could utilize her ability to kind of find other ways around, find other ways to cope and to be healthy. But when she was online, that did leave her in a situation where she's kind of alone in her room, and she was somebody who engaged in self-harm, and it was there, it was accessible, it was immediate, it was an immediate fix in that moment. And I think that's possibly the cure, is really balance. And you wouldn't let your kid eat McDonald's as their only meal, or 24 hours a day, or eat something like that every single day. No judgment against McDonald's. I like McDonald's sometimes too, but you can't have junk food all the time. I think it's sprinkling in the broccoli, it's sprinkling in the vegetables, which might be exercise, in-person social activities, sports, reading, literature, arts, any of those things, and trying to help encourage them to not have this singular focus on digital, and have a more balanced focus on both digital and real world.
Thank you. Dr. Alemo?
Yeah, I think there's so many things that parents can do to set up healthy boundaries around kids' social media use. First, I think it's important to acknowledge that this is a conversation of enormous privilege. Because, if you are a single parent working 60 hours a week to make ends meet, your kid is probably spending a lot more time on social media because you can't give them the healthy offline activities, right? I know when my kids are homesick, I often have to give them a device so that I can do an important interview. I think it's so important to acknowledge that, and the broken childcare system in this country, and all of the other factors that play into how much time kids spend on social media. I have a couple chapters in my book in which I talk about how the world judges women in particular very unfairly on social networks. And so I am not here to shame parents for their choices, but I do think that there are some healthy things we can try to do. First of all, this is going to look different for every family. A lot of experts, for instance, say, well, whatever you do, don't allow phones at the dinner table. My husband works in an emergency room. He works mostly nights and weekends. One of the best things I do is put my phone on the table and FaceTime him into dinner when he can do it, right? And that's extraordinarily healthy for my family. So there's no list of boundaries that works for everyone's life circumstances. And I think the ideal thing is to set these boundaries in conversation with your children, who will probably have a lot of smart and very reasonable ideas. So for instance, you might decide that phones are a reward that kids get to use after they complete their homework each day. However, there will be times when kids need to get on the internet in order to do their homework, right? To conduct research. You might not have phones at the dinner table because you're all physically present, but then one day, one of your family members will be sick and you'll be waiting for news about them. So you'll bring your phones to the table. So it's important to be flexible and to develop these boundaries and rules in conversation with your kids. Another piece of advice I have for parents is sitting down and looking at kids' social networks with them. So many parents who have come to my events tell me that they feel incredibly lost because a lot of us grew up in a generation where, of course, our parents didn't have this conversation with us. And a lot of parents feel like they don't know how to create a TikTok. They're not on Snapchat. How are they supposed to know how to teach their kids how how to protect themselves online or how to set the right boundaries. And what I'm constantly telling parents is ask your kid to pull out TikTok if you let your kid use TikTok and search for content that aligns with their interests, right? Maybe your kid wants to be a veterinarian, so you're going to search for content about animals, whatever it is. That's a way of working with your child to try to teach them how to find healthy content. But the other brilliant thing it does is it sends a signal to algorithms that your kid is interested in that kind of content. And therefore, the algorithm is going to show your kid more of that kind of content, even when you're not with them. Along with that, so many parents feel lost, and part of this is a conversation about the fact that kids generally are not getting good educations on how to protect and empower themselves online in schools, which is absolutely, it's negligent. But I think I'm always telling parents, you don't need to be on TikTok yourself to read the New York Times and know that what's trending on TikTok lately is Sephora Kids and Botox babies content telling 10-year-olds they need full faces of makeup and telling 20-year-olds that they need Botox. So you can keep up with the trends simply by reading the media and being an educated person yourself, which I know is easier said than done when we're juggling all the demands of parenthood and everything else we have to do. And then the last thing goes back to what Dr. Teague said. I think it's so important to give kids healthy offline activities. I think that there's this misperception that kids want to spend all their time on social media, and that is simply not true. The researcher Dana Boyd interviewed American teenagers, and they told her they would much rather get together in person with their friends than connect on social media. And the reason they don't is because their parents don't let them, right? Whether it's their overscheduled lives or whether it's lack of transportation, whatever it is. And so I just think it's important to remember that our kids need to connect face to face with their friends. And also that, it is impossible to be on TikTok if you're playing in a basketball game. And so making sure that your kids have a good roster, a good calendar of healthy activities is a way of just naturally reducing their screen time without even having to have the conversation or the battle.
Sorry, I was muted. So next, thank you both. And Dr. Alimo, I'm going to ask you this one, and this is sort of a two-part question. What can parents do if they suspect their children is a victim of cyberbullying? And conversely, what do we do to talk to students who we believe are cyberbullying?
So as I said, I think these conversations about kindness start ideally when kids are very young. If you think your kid is being cyberbullied, I think you have to talk to them about it. I think you have to just say straight up, is someone bullying you or treating you inappropriately online? And that's where, part of it comes down to what's happening, right? In terms of what the appropriate response is next. The big form of cyberbullying that I'm worried about at the moment, which is just one of them, is deep fakes. And so as you probably know, deep fakes are fake images or video created using artificial intelligence. The tools to do this are now widely available across the internet. And surprise, surprise, the majority of deep fakes that are being created are pornographic. And so you have kids as young as middle schoolers in Beverly Hills who have had new deep fakes created of them by their classmates. And, I live in New Jersey, and recently boys at Westfield High School created new deepfakes of their female classmates. And the thing that I just couldn't get past in the Wall Street Journal's reporting of this episode was that parents in the town of Westfield were divided over whether this was a big deal. And one thing I write about in my book is that, when a woman or a girl's intimate images end up online, whether or not they're real, it puts her at risk of depression and suicide and sexual assault. It makes it harder for her to date. It makes it harder for her to get a job. It is life destroying. And so you have this conversation with your kid. And then if it's a situation like that, law enforcement needs to be involved, right? And if it's a smaller situation, hopefully you can diffuse it by coaching your kid, or maybe it's calling a guidance counselor. So some of it depends on sort of what's happening next. And then what if you suspect your kid of doing the bullying, right? So that's where I think it's important to educate kids about the harms that it causes to victims so that no kid can say, oh, I created these new deepfakes. I was just having fun. I didn't know it would be harmful, right? So we have to talk to kids about just how life destroying some of these forms of bullying are. And, if a kid is doing the bullying, I'm not the therapist here, but my sense is often that kid, that's a cry for help, right? That kid is perhaps being bullied themselves or profoundly unhappy. And so I think that there are deeper issues that it's important to get to the bottom of. And that's where, of course, you'll want to have the support of professional help.
Thank you.
Dr. Teague, would you like to follow up?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to recover from my new deepfake panic attack that I just got into. I haven't encountered that yet, but I am aware that that is a thing, and it's very scary. I mean, I kind of touched on it before. If your child is a victim of cyberbullying, you're absolutely correct. You have to talk to them. Sit down and have a conversation with them. Steer them to, if they can't speak to you, steer them towards a trusted adult. Doesn't have to be the school psychologist, doesn't have to be the school social worker. It could be a coach, it could be a teacher, it could be an aunt, it could be any trusted adult. And I think one of the things that they actually suggest that is a preventative and protective factor is when you do allow your child onto social media, having a network of trusted adults that are on there with them. So whether it be, you following them as their parent, maybe you're a trusted aunt if they want to have something with a little bit more privacy, but somebody else that can kind of keep an eye on it. How do we talk to students who are cyberbullying? Yes, I would agree that that is a cry for help. I do think in certain cases, if we find that, consequences, you've violated, your this is, you said it's a privilege. Social media is a privilege. It is not a right. It is not, I know certain communities do need it for the ability to communicate. I think particularly in less developed nations where and nations where free communication isn't really allowed. That's a different thing. But I think where we're talking about, kids in New York State and um are generally social media is going to be a privilege for them. And I think if you're concerned that they're engaging in it or using it incorrectly, number one, definitely teach and use it as a teaching moment. Would you want that to happen to you? How would you like it if somebody commented on your jawline in there? How would you like it if somebody made a deep fake nude of you and posted it online? Use it as a teaching moment. Try to build that kindness. I don't believe that there are any bad kids. I think there are bad behaviors. And I think it's something that we can teach and they can learn. And I think really, again, it's all about developing protective factors and shifting the way we look at it. I think this technology was thrust upon us very rapidly. And it went from, I remember like when it came out, you had the Palm Pilot, and then it was iPods, and then they kind of mushed the two of them together, and it was this cool productivity device in the iPhone. And it was a productivity device at first, and then all of a sudden it kind of merged and became a leisure device. And then all of a sudden we started handing 8-year-olds unlimited access to everything in the world, which includes all of the horrible things that we've kind of been talking about all day. And I think it's really, we have to shift the way that we think about these things. And I think finding them more balance, giving them more opportunities. And it doesn't necessarily, I know I think there was a good comment before about parents who are single parents or parents who have to work multiple jobs who aren't home. Both of my wife and I both work, and kind of like you said, sometimes we got to survive and sometimes you got to watch Bluey because I got to do something. But the truth is, I think giving them unstructured opportunities in the community, as scary as the world is on social media, the truth is that our violent crime statistics, they're going down. They're really not. The world is not the way that it was in the 70s. And actually, kids had way more freedom in the 70s when the world was probably a more dangerous place than what statistics would say right now. In fact, I think I just saw something today popped up in my newsfeed that, the FBI found violent crimes are, despite what you would see on social media, violent crimes are down. I think there's still violence in the world. There always has been violence in the world. We're not going to extinguish that. But I think giving them more opportunities in the real world to interact in person is definitely protective over digital interactions.
Thank you. So I know we touched on this a little bit, but I also know as a parent that it's always nice to have some ideas, which then triggers other ideas. So can you share some healthy tips and tricks for setting healthy boundaries and limits on social media? Things that you've seen people do and you use yourself. We're going to start with Jason.
Yes. I kind of touched on a lot of them before, but I can kind of go a little bit more into detail. So there's apps that you can get. So Life 360 is a big one that I know a lot of parents use. I haven't had to go there personally yet myself. Life 360, it tracks where your child is in real time. It can track if they're getting into cars, how fast the car is going. It's kind of a good way that you can monitor what's going on there with them, but it can also be used to limit screen time, turn off the phone during school hours. 100%. I think a great tip would be go to your school board and ask for them to really truly ban school phones from being in schools. They don't need them in the schools. I can tell you, I'm in there every day. I see which up. So Life 360 is one of the apps. Another app, if you want to go the third party route, is Bark. Bark is really cool. I have not used it, but from the research that I've done, it's it was endorsed by one of the consumer safety groups. Common Sense Media. Thank you. I'm thanking myself. Common Sense Media endorsed it as a good product. What it does that I think is actually ingenious, and I would definitely use it if you have a kid that you're already concerned has kind of gone down that hole a little bit more. What it does is, so you don't have to look at every text message and every social media interaction that they're having. Bark will kind of monitor that for you. And if there is something, if it is something about, say, self-injury pops up, or anorexia, or, some sort of bullying pops up, you'll as the parent get a notification that like, hey, there's something that you need to check on. And I think even more simply, just using the apps that are built into the phone as it is. The Screen Time app is really great. You can lock down your phone. You can choose to give only a set amount of time, and you can set parameters on when they can use it. You could turn off the phone during the daytime while they're at school. You can give them access, in the afternoons, but you can shut it down at like a reasonable bedtime so that the kids are not staying on it all night. And I think you touched on this, Kara, just educate yourself. Be aware of what's going on. There are great books out there. I don't get any paid by anything by it, but Jonathan Haidt, if you could see The Anxious Generation, I got blur on, so you can't see. Oh, there you go, Jonathan Haidt. He's got a great book out right now about how, our kids have been rewired to think about things differently. Another one that I found helpful, Johan Hari wrote Stolen Focus. I think that's also a great book out there that kind of talks about how our attention has really been divided and coerced by these algorithms and this content that's just designed to keep us going on there. And really just setting limits as early as possible and trying to, teach kids at a younger age about these things. Let's not treat it like this is just a harmless video game from the 80s. Super Mario Brothers wasn't going to get you addicted and sucked in and comment on your body image. Your smartphone might.
Thank you. Dr. Kara?
Yeah, I agree with you that Dr. Haidt is rightly sounding the alarm in really smart ways about our youth mental health crisis. I do feel compelled to also say that, he's someone who claims in his book that, gender dysphoria or being trans is something that you catch on social media. And that's very disturbing to me, as is the idea that, the voices of kids who say that social media has been a lifeline for them are not relevant or accurate. However, many great contributions in that book, no doubt. the two, I gave you my ideas for setting boundaries in response to the last question. The big trick, I'd say, is talking to the parents of your kids' friends while they're still young and getting on the same page with them. So if you can collectively agree that your kids will not use these apps until a particular age, I am with Dr. Height on saying 16, that will be very valuable. My kids are younger. They're still in preschool, and I'm already starting to have these conversations. But I think it's important for parents to remind ourselves that we shouldn't be pressured either. So just an anecdote, one of my mom friends texted me yesterday and said, I need some advice. My daughter needs to wear makeup to a recital. And so I texted her back and I said, well, children's makeup is not regulated by the FDA. It's considered a toy. So whatever you do, don't buy her children's makeup. If you're comfortable with your daughter wearing makeup, buy her a reputable adult brand. And if you're not comfortable, send her without makeup to the recital, which is what I did when my daughter had a recital last year. And she texted me back and said, I'm not comfortable. That was helpful. And I said to her, great. And you can tell your child that one of her best friends, my daughter, isn't allowed to wear makeup either in preschool. And it was just that same kind of moment where we got into the conversation about this is what we're going to have to do when they're 12 years old asking for social media, right? Collectively agree they're not going to have it so they won't be the only kid left out, and let them know that their close friends aren't using it either. But when you ask for more tricks and tips, I get nervous because I think that ultimately there aren't any. So you can, because kids are so smart, right? So yes, you can try to follow your kid on social media, but I'll just tell you that the girls who I interviewed explained to me how you create a Finsta. You create an account under a different name that you don't give your parents, that you give your friends to share what you want to share. You can
100%.
you can tell your kid they can't use Instagram, but they will put something that looks like a calculator on the screen of their phone, and that will be Instagram. You can tell them they can't use TikTok, so they'll watch TikTok on the school bus when one of their friends shows it to them. And so really, ultimately, besides collective action, the only trick is teaching your kids, right, how to protect themselves, instilling the right values, and having them know that if they disregard all the rules anyway and they get into trouble, they can come to you.
Thank you. So we had we're getting a little bit close on time, but we did have a couple of quick things. So one of the questions was if you could help your kids that are talking to somebody for months online, determine the difference between who they think of as friend who's only online versus their friends who are actually having in-person conversations. How do we help them understand the differential between online friends and, in-person friends?
I think, I'm sorry, I'm just going to jump in quick because I deal with that every single day. I was talking to a student about it today. It's very confusing. I think there is a part of it that we have to acknowledge. They're growing up in a different world, and those friendships are important to them. And while we may see them differently, they're real to them. This is a real friendship to them. This is a true connection that they feel like they have. My best efforts have been, or my most effective efforts have been to kind of help kids with that, is to just educate, teach them. I mean, I talk to kids, it's interesting. It's like, how could you be a friend with somebody if you don't even know how they smell? What if they have a weird odor about them? Like, not even necessarily a bad one, just an odor about them that you're like, ooh, I don't think I can be in the room with you right now, and just being real and encouraging and talking to them about, the importance of touch. Touch is important. Again, consensual, safe touch. I'm talking about. I'm not talking about anything, but that's important. We need that. That we grew up for generations upon generations having that kind of contact, and that kind of contact is not there when you're having a digital friend. And I think just teaching them, talk to them about it, talk to them about what the differences are, talk to them about, like, how do you know what this person is? Maybe get to know them. I know some parents have found some success, talking with them, with that person, having a FaceTime and being involved in the FaceTime with that person. I think, again, it's giving them other opportunities, having them have variety. And I think online friends can be good. in moderation, just like everything else. Can't just have, too much of one thing isn't good for anything.
I know we're running out of time, so I'll talk fast. One, I think teach kids to verify that the people who follow and friend them are really who they think they are, because this is how kids often end up connected with predators. And then the second thing is teaching kids who influencers really are. So a lot of us come to think that influencers are our friends, and it's really important to demystify that for kids and to explain that these are people who are projecting a particular life in an effort to get money from brands that probably does not closely resemble what their life really looks like.
Thank you. So I think, thank you both, and we're going to throw it back to Patricia for closing remarks.
Thank you. I think you just have to, Kyle has to do something with me so everybody can see me
Yeah,
again.
hold on one second. We got a little switched around here by the tech, so give me a second, Patricia.
Thank you so much. I actually have to say, Dr. Teague, I want to throw this at you. There was a comment put in our chat about the Chromebooks and iPads that the districts are giving, and parents feeling that there's not any controls on them. Can controls be set up on those as well? I mean, I know a lot of the districts, one of the comments too happened to be that some of the homework assignments they're giving them are actually YouTube videos. Is there some way that parents can set up controls on the devices that come from the schools?
So I think the school devices, at least in my district, the school devices are fairly locked down. We use iPads. I've heard Chromebooks are more limited from my understanding, but so the school devices should be locked down already. And I would encourage you, if you're feeling like your school device is not locked down, speak to somebody at your school, and because there might be something that the tech department can do to undo what your child has done. But the truth is exactly what Kara said. Whatever you put in there, they're going to figure out a way to get around it. And I don't say that that means don't do it. Still do it. It's good to have those hurdles in place. They should have to have something to overcome. Make it more difficult for them. Make them feel a little bit guilty about the fact that, like, ooh, I'm breaking this right now. I probably shouldn't be doing that. That's good. Let them feel a little bit of that. But yeah, none of those parental control situations are going to be perfect, because if you have a savvy kid that wants to get in there, the same way we as kids, when we wanted to get something and we weren't supposed to have it, or we shouldn't have had it, a lot of us found a way. I know I did when I was young. And I'm sure a lot of these kids, I'm sure my two kids are going to go try to find a way as well. But I think as much as you can, keep the conversations open. Try not to be too punitive in the sense. I loved what you said before about making sure that they're comfortable with coming to you, so that when there's problems, they have that open line of communication. And at the same time, though, yeah, just you got to do your best. And it's kind of like when they get through one hole, you plug that one up, and then they're going to find another one, and then you're going to plug that up, and it's just kind of becomes a game of whack-a-mole.
Thank you so much. Listen, I think that you've given us a lot of things to think about. You've given us some great tools that will help us along the way. And you've opened my eyes to a lot of things. You know, you did make the comment, both of you, about that we're growing up in a different world. We certainly are. And again, we've learned to navigate through a system where, you know, we had telephones and, you know, CD players and 8-tracks, and our kids will never know those because of the way things are moving. But social media is here. It's part of our life. We need to continue to grow, adapt, and advance forward with it. So I really want you all to reach out, open up that dialogue with your children about their mental health, about their social media, help them to navigate that social media responsibly in a healthy and positive way. We're going to add some tools into the chat for everyone that you can find on the National PTA web page. And Dr. Teague and Dr. Alamo, I believe that you have added your information as well, your books that you mentioned, for people to reach out and look at and use. I want to thank you very much, both of you, for joining us this evening and helping us get this message out and help our parents help their children. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. And hopefully this webinar will help you to open up that mental health dialogue in your home and give you some tools to help do that. Look for our next webinar, which we'll be talking about depression. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a good night.
Take care. Thank you.